So the simple formula that we use is called keep, grow, and protect. This is the 3% formula. This is what we use and leverage every single day in our business to save millions of dollars. I get to share a lot of insights. I get to teach and coach a lot. I work with clients every day, but I don't get to show what we really do every day because it's hard to do that. It's hard to be able to share so much information with everyone. But when I know we have the right people who could take and get that information and receive it in a way because you're the right place, because you've made a decision, because you got the right message, because you said, I want to be there, David. I want to change my life. I want to go from rich where I'm at, making some money, to go into wealth, because I want to start saving on my taxes. I want to start making the right investments. I want to start protecting and controlling everything. Today, we are going to do that. So without further ado, let's kick it off. Before we begin, I'll introduce myself. My name is David A. Pettis. If I haven't had the opportunity to meet you or work with you at some point, my apologies, but I've been in the tax industry for the last 16 years, and I started my career as a tax professional with aspirations of doing big things. Like, that was my goal, to become a very successful tax professional. And I did that. I grew my business very fast, and I was serving thousands of clients, filing tax returns for literally different types of people, from business owners to W-2 wage earners to retirees to anybody. I mean, I filed literally thousands of returns. And in 2015, when I'm coming to file my own personal tax return, I realized something. See, I realized in that day that I didn't really know taxes. At the bottom of my own tax return, I was looking at a $142,000 tax bill, and I didn't really realize why I had this bill. And like most of you probably thinking, like, David, how would you have a tax bill, but you're a tax preparer? Well, I realized I didn't know taxes. I just knew how to file returns, which is what most tax professionals do. And as I'm preparing that return, I said, man, what am I going to do about this? And, like most of us, we probably are looking for somebody to help us. So I said, I got to go to somebody who's got experience, who maybe could help me in this way. So I reached out to a very successful CPA friend of mine, and I said, hey, man, can I come by your office and maybe share my tax return with you, and you can help me see if this is correct? So I took my tax return, I took all the documents, I sat down with him, and he reviewed everything. And as I'm sitting there looking across his desk through all the files, really taking in the CPA vibe, he looks over at the desk from me and he says, David, you were right. You owe $142,000. And I said, how can this be? And he says, man, this is just what happens when you make money. And I said, that this is paying taxes. I get it, but like, there's got to be a way to lower this, right? Like, you've got to be able to help me. And he says, no, David, you see what happens when you make money? You pay taxes. How many of you have heard that statement? When you make money, you pay taxes. Say aye in the chat. Anybody ever heard that? Like, this is how it is, David. Just, I'm supposed to pay, right? Anybody else heard that besides me? And when he said that to me, I kind of got a little defensive. I said, really? Like, I'm supposed to pay taxes? And he says, yes, that's just the way it is. Taxes were made to be paid, and you've got to pay them. And I said, there's got to be some way to avoid these things. And he says, well, you didn't plan, number one, so there's no way to do it. And this is just the way it's always been. He goes, I pay taxes, my clients pay taxes. That's just the way it goes when you make money. And so I refused to take what he was saying. I said, there's got to be a way. I'm kind of contemplating in my mind, is this the way it is? But at the same time, I don't want to pay him. And I said, why would I pay this much in taxes? Like, what do I get for it? And he goes, look, David, if you do not pay this tax bill, you should not have the right to vote. And when he shared that with me in that moment, being a patriot, being somebody who loves this country, I thought, this isn't patriotism. But then I was like, maybe it is. But to me, I was thinking patriotism is supporting our country by creating jobs and, giving to charity and supporting my family and creating wealth. That's what I thought. But he's telling me paying taxes is wealth. And so I said, okay, I'll take the lick in here and I'll pay this tax. And as I walked out of that office with my tail between my legs, I made a decision that I was not going to allow myself to be put in this position again. And that's what I did. I made that decision that day, and I decided to study and learn the tax code as much as I could for the next 5 years. That's what I did. I studied and I learned. I studied and I learned, and I studied and learned, and I was dropping my tax bill every single year, 30%, 40%. Now, the reason that I was doing this for me is because I didn't have any clients that I could do it for. See, as a tax professional, typically I'm just helping people file their returns. And most of my clients, well, they didn't have big tax problems. Most of them got a refund. And when it came down to it, I couldn't implement these strategies for them. But then comes 2020 when COVID hits and the world's changing, and my whole entire business, literally thousands of clients that we serve, were all coming in person. These are people who came in and dropped off their paperwork, people who we shook their hands. And when I got to that point, COVID hits, I have to go virtual. And I said, what am I going to do here? And I went virtual with my business, right? And I said, I got to market differently. I got to expose myself differently. And that's when I went to social media. And that's probably how we connected. And I went social media. I said, I'm going to talk about what I can do to help people filing their tax returns. And people would reach out to me, David, can you help me file my return? David, can you help me with my SBA stuff? And so I did that. And so I was helping people file their SBA stuff. And one client in particular in March reached out to me and said, David, can you help me with my PPT and EIDL, if anybody knows what that SBA stuff was? And so I started to help him. And in the middle of reviewing his paperwork, I realized virtually that this client paid over $100,000 to the IRS. And I said, hey, man, before we get to this, can I help look at your returns real quick? And what I realized in the moment, that he was not structured properly in his corporation, that he wasn't maximizing deductions, that he didn't have the right investment strategies. And I said, let me make these recommendations. And I did some quick calculations and I realized I could save him 50 grand. And in that moment, the guy says, man, help me, bro, help me. And I said, okay, I'm going to help you. And in that moment, I thought, man, I could really do this. Like, this is what I was looking for in 2015 when I had this big tax bill. This is who I was looking for. And I had become that person. And so in that moment, becoming that person, sitting in that moment, thinking about how I could help more people, how I've built a successful business, how I've gone through all the crap, I did it all wrong, so that eventually one day I could say, man, I know what to do now. And so I helped him and I helped so many other people that year. And I realized that I didn't just want to file taxes anymore. And I converted my business to a tax strategy practice. And I haven't looked back. Today, we help thousands of people across the country through giving out information and sharing strategy. See, maybe you're here today and you're like, David, I've had my first tax bill this year, or maybe it was 5 years ago. Whenever your first tax bill was, I'm sure that day you said, I don't want this to happen again, just like I did. So I took it upon myself to make these decisions to be here today, so you don't have to go through that anymore. So you don't have to overpay, because giving your money to something you don't support isn't the right way. So my goal here today is to give you the right ways, to share with you what we do and why we do it and how we do it differently. Let's break down a few things, okay? I want you guys to know a few things before we begin, okay? See, in order to get to the 3% Club, we're on a mission. And we're on a mission to help high achievers like you get to the 3% Club. And then what they're going to do when they get there, which is the 3% Club, is the 3% of taxpayers who pay zero federal income tax, but make over 200 grand. That could be you. And my goal is here to help you keep more of your money, leverage that money to make investments, keep more of your money, leverage what you keep, grow your business, build true wealth, right? That is the goal by saving these tax dollars. Now, oh my gosh, I went too fast. There you go. All right, let's go back. There you go. All right. So every year I literally help hundreds of clients. Me and my team help hundreds of clients across this country utilize the 3% formula to save on average 36% on their taxes. Now, millions of dollars are saved by our clients every single year because of this formula, and I want to share that formula here with you today. So the simple formula that we use is called keep, grow, and protect. This is the 3% formula. This is what we use and leverage every single day in our business to save millions of dollars. And I want to break this formula down for you here today. See, this 3% formula gets you to keep more of your money, build wealth, and having a life lived full of freedom, which is what I do every day, and so do our clients. So now that we know the formula, keep, grow, protect. And by the way, in the chat, I want you guys to type this, keep, grow, protect. Can y'all do that for me? Put keep, grow, protect. I don't want anybody to forget the formula. I don't want anybody to forget it. Keep, grow, and protect, because that's our framework for this event. So if you could do, there you go. Thank you, everyone. There you go. So keep, grow, protect. Let's follow that formula. That's our mantra through this event. The formula is keep, grow, protect. Okay, so let's start with why most people who are not here overpay in their taxes, okay? So the first reason that people will pay over in taxes is because the code is complex. See, the code was written to not be easy to read. In fact, it's over 6,000 pages. It would take you over a week to read if you wanted to. And it's filled with jargon and language that doesn't, maybe make sense to most normal people. And it's very difficult to decipher what things apply to your situation and what things don't. Now, if you add in the appendixes and the rules and the regulations and the guides, you'd have over 75,000 pages of code that you would have to work through. And it's very, again, overwhelming. And I believe they did this for a reason, right? Because I think about the code and taxes like a game. See, I played video games when I was a kid, right? And if you play an adult when you're a kid, a video game, you're always going to win because kids know what? The rules. See, it doesn't matter how good you are. You could be a very great athlete. You could be an athlete just because you're an athlete. You stay in good shape, you work out every day, and you go out and you play a sport you've never played before. And an amateur could beat you, right? At least in physique. And the reason they can is, guess what? Because they know the rules. See, the point of the game is to play the game at a high level. And those who know the rules, write this down, those who know the rules rule. And so what we've mastered is what we call the cheat codes. When I was a kid, you used to go to the little Nintendo and you'd put like up, up, down, down, left, left, and then A, B, C or whatever, and it would let you beat the dragon or unlock the secret move in Mortal Kombat. All of those things are what we practice every day, the cheat codes. How do we get around what is normally being used? You see, I've been studying the code for the last 2 decades, so you don't have to. My goal is to help you get away from having to understand the code so you could do what you love doing, which is going out and making money, building wealth, taking care of your family, giving to the community, giving to your church, whatever that is for you. My goal is to help you do that. Now, I want to start by talking about some of the common tax strategies before we get into deep diving real strategies. Let's talk about the common tax strategies, because this is fundamental stuff that I hear all the time, and I want to make sure we get them out of the way, because if we don't get these out of the way, you're going to ask me, David, what about these things? So using common tax strategies, let's start with the first one. Did you click? I don't want to click twice. There you go. Expensing to zero. So if you're working with a tax professional right now who's recommended this strategy, it's a common tax strategy. And maybe you've used it. Maybe you've fallen for this strategy, because I did. When I first got into business, my goal was to expense to zero. That means at the end of the year, when I look over my financials and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm going to show an income. And I'm like, man, I'm probably going to pay taxes. So guess what? I start spending money. I start buying things. I start investing in things that I might not necessarily, or that may not necessarily be investments. That's the truth. I start prepaying for expenses. I start buying things that are unnecessary. I bought cell phones, I'd buy supplies, I prepaid for marketing, I gave people a bonus just so I could expense to zero. And this is a common tax strategy that I come across when I meet with somebody. And the challenge with common tax strategies like this one is that when you expense to zero, it means you literally report zero. And the difference between expensing to zero and investing to zero, which we're going to talk about here today, is when you expense to zero, you show no income because you spent it all. And when you spend all your money, guess what? When you go borrow money, like to buy your first property, like either an investment or even your primary residence, or you try to make an investment in something and they tell you you're not a accredited investor, you don't have qualifications, and you're like, but I make money. Well, you may make money, but it sucks because on paper it shows that you don't. And this happens a lot. These common tax strategies that are recommended by tax professionals as a strategy, but it really doesn't suit for most people. And I've fallen victim to that. When I was first coming up, that's what I did. Expense, expense, expense. And then when I went to try to buy a house, I was like, hey, I make money. And they're like, no, you don't. You blew it all. And that was because I was a tax preparer. I didn't know better. I didn't know strategy, because investing to zero, which we're going to talk about here today, is the way. The next tax strategy I get all the time is the common tax strategies out there, maybe TikTok strategy, is buy an equipment or an SUV. And this sounds really appealing when you get it from a tax professional. You know, hey, my tax guy told me to go buy a new Escalade because I need the deduction. It's a great strategy if you need an Escalade, but most people don't, and most people don't use them for primary business activities. And then guess what? It's not necessarily an investment, it's a liability. You guys know that. Even if you like the car or the vehicle, it's not necessarily that you don't want it. It's the payment never stops. Even though you may get that one tax deduction in the year that you bought the vehicle, the payment doesn't stop. And we know, even though I like Cadillac Escalades, if you buy an Escalade, it's a depreciating asset. And if you want to make money in life, you can't buy a bunch of those. You can't do that as a tax strategy because it'll hurt you. And that's commonly used as a strategy. It's a common use thing. In addition to that, equipment and machinery. I had a client last year who shared with me that they bought over $1 million worth of machinery that they didn't need for their business. $1 million worth of machinery that they did not need, that they said, we're going to be able to use this 3 years from now. And I said, why would you do that? They said, well, our tax professional to me. Okay, $1 million. Did you pay cash? No, we financed it. What was the interest rate? 19%. But they got the tax savings, which they wanted, but they're paying 19% on something they can't maximize or leverage. And that's a problem. Very commonly used strategy. Common. And I don't want you to think, if you've done this before, I'm pretty confident it wasn't your idea. It was planted in your head through. Okay. How about contributing to a retirement account? I hear this as a strategy. By the way, I don't think it's a horrible strategy. This is the last of the strategies. This is when we're icing on the cake. And usually this strategy is employed because it's being used. See, we use this as a strategy when you file April 15th or October 15th. But the strategy should be employed, or at least the concept, the idea, the allocation of the money should be done before the year ends. The tax strategy happens within a 12-month period. It happens between January and December, and it happens for that year. After December 31st, there's very few things that can be done. And it's not like there isn't anything that can be done, but it's limited. And you and I, we don't want limited strategies, and we don't want to use these common strategies. We want to take a proactive, strategic approach. And this, as a strategy, is good. However, it's usually done in the wrong way, which is typically after a year ends. Now, utilizing these one size, it sounds good in the I did buy an SUV. I did buy equipment, but in my equipment is computers and iPads and all those things. I definitely tried to contribute to retirement. That's what I tried to do. But again, these are one size fits all. And I don't know about you. I've never, ever had this with anyone else. See, everything I think about in taxes is different. Just like every business is different, every tax return is different. So we could not necessarily say these strategies apply to you because we don't know your unique situation. Everything is tailored to a person. And that's very important to understand in this process. And as we go through today, I want you to get this, that it's about getting your strategy, your strategy. So I want you to know, if you've tried any of these strategies, if you've been recommended these strategies, if you watched a video on TikTok about these strategies, just so you know, you have left a lot on the table. In Texas, we say you leave a lot of meat on the bone. But huge opportunities are being missed here if we've used any of these strategies. Because in this case, again, if you'd use these strategies, what you're commonly doing is you're putting your tax return in a position that doesn't need to be, not given the outcome. You see, in the generation of wealth, to build real, it is, and real wealth is beyond what most of us will normally think. It's not just, I have a lot of money. It's, I've got a plan. I avoid taxes. I invest in the right things because I want to build this thing that goes generation to generation. See, the 3% formula is much more than just these common strategies. And our goal here today is to break that down, to show you those strategies in action, because you deserve to see the rest.